citizen.
Out of many
we are world citizens. Same vision is for equal rights and justice for the people them. What's happening to this beautiful world that we're living in? World citizen, lift up your voices.
Welcome to another episode of the People Powered Planet podcast, where each week we have amazing solutionaries. Now, there is just such an ocean of darkness, of negative things happening in the world that can just overwhelm us. But sometimes we need to shift our focus from that ocean of darkness to the simultaneous ocean of goodness, of opportunities, of people all over the world making shifts, making changes, creating all new ways for us to do things and to operate as citizens of our one planet Earth. So as Garry Davis was the eternal optimist, always feeling that we could have one world, the inspiration for our People Powered Planet podcast, world citizen number one, Garry Davis, we're ready now to launch into another great episode with a very special guest. Now, today's guest is an old friend of mine, someone that Garry knew for many, many years. In fact, he was Garry's commissioner for energy, for how do we create a sustainable energy for the future. So a very appropriate topic today when we're at the beginning of COP26 to have with us Peter Meisen. Now, Peter Meisen heads Global Energy Network Initiative. And it is like a genie that comes out of the bottle. He has this incredible sim center. He had this incredible sim center in San Diego. And, some of you may have, you've probably all seen the mission control they had for launching the satellites that went into outer space. In the movie War Games, they had this incredible mission control thing with lights, screens, cameras all over, all designed to help us blow up the world, to end life on Earth. Well, he has another kind of sim center, and you walk in there and whoa, on all these different screens, all these different things going on, how do we save the planet? So it's a mission control for the mission of saving the world instead of blowing up the world. Quite a bit of better mission, I would say. So we're happy to have with us the founder of that mission control, Peter Meisen. And in addition to having this sim center, he and Garry Davis were both inspired by Buckminster Fuller. Buckminster Fuller was an amazing visionary who was working on figuring out how can we make 100% of humanity, make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest period of time. And that became Garry's objective. That's what the People Powered Planet is all about. How do we make the world work in the shortest amount of time? Because we don't have a lot of time, folks. We've got to move on it quickly. Peter, welcome to the People Powered Planet podcast.
Thanks, Arthur. Good to be with you and all our guests. Thank you for being here.
So maybe before we get, Peter's got an incredible presentation to show us and some amazing slides. But before he does that, I'd love it if you tell us a little bit more about, how he met Garry, how he got involved with Garry. And most of you have seen our movie, The World Is My Country, which inspired this whole podcast about an amazing guy who lived as a citizen of no nation, only the world for over 65 years. Peter, first tell us a little bit about your connection with Garry.
Garry and I first met in Brazil at the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit. If you go back to 1992, it was the early days of GENI, the Global Energy Network Institute. And so there was a forum like where all the delegates meet, just like there is at COP26. And then there was another venue on the beach that was at the park there in Rio. And all the NGOs were setting up exhibits for that 2-week period. And I had about 6 of our group down there telling our story about linking renewables around the world. And then Garry also had his booth and we connected. He came by and he said, Bucky. And when we sort of went off on our Bucky tangents together, because he comes from that same, I think that same legacy as do I. And that was our first meeting and continued over many years.
Yeah, that was a wonderful. I remember being part of that Earth Summit and the incredible experience of, on the one hand, all the nations meeting, but on the other hand, just an incredible rich array of peoples from all over the world.
If you ever get to go to one of those global events, you're not usually unless you have real credentials, you can't get into the official part, but there's usually an NGO event, much like the Rotary Convention has its project exhibits at the Friendship Hall. And you see so many, hundreds and hundreds of great activities, committed people doing things on all activities from around the world. And it's really an inspiring thing to do.
It is indeed. And we're having that going on right now with COP26 and an amazing number of citizens doing all kinds of things, including citizens who are working on making ecocide a crime. What is already a crime? It's the worst of all crimes, but officially getting it recognized as a crime, but also a big campaign on the part of World Beyond War, and over, I think it's, was it 500 groups, I believe, are working to try to get the military included in the COP26 limits, because for some reason they've gotten a free pass, even though the Pentagon is the #1 consumer of petroleum in the US, and is also the militarism and wars really use up the biggest share of the renewable of the energy of the planet, and all for a destructive purpose, and of course threaten the ultimate global the ultimate global catastrophe, which is of course nuclear war, which ends the atmosphere that we all rely on to live on. So let's move to the positive alternatives that we are creating, and that incredible energy that's being created out in the park. And let's hear right now from you, Peter, about your idea.
Thank you. So this is a rich deck that does both takes us into a very positive area of what's happening in the world, but also a very realistic dive into some of the challenges, the real problems that the world has created for itself. So I don't want to sugarcoat anything here. I want to we're all adults. We can deal with the hard stuff as well. So I've entitled this "The Good News, the Bad News, and What We Can Do About It." Similar presentation I did with the IEEE. I'm an electrical engineer by background from UCSD in San Diego, and then Rotarian. I grew up in the culture with my dad, being in Rotary in one of the local clubs here in San Diego County. And so he was a lifer and never missed a meeting, always did the makeup. So that was always sort of in the culture for me. And so I come from the work really from those two mission statements of Rotary and the IEEE, that within Rotary, we want to see people unite and take action to create lasting change around the globe and in our communities. The mission for IEEE, not that much different, is for the benefit, technological innovation for the benefit of all humanity. So let's dive in. This was the mission statement for the World Game, the opposite of war games. So Bucky was involved in the Second World War and worked on ships and saw what they were used for. He said, let's turn that statement upside down. How do we make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time, through spontaneous cooperation without ecological damage or disadvantage to anyone? That's a living question that will never cease to be important. And it became the foundation for our work with GENI and the Sim Center. So the highest priority objective, I'm not going to hold back on this one. This was the #1 strategy for that particular, from that question, and it's on page 206 of the book Critical Path. That's where I first discovered it. It floored me. I was looking for the next project in my life, and he said the #1 solution for the world. Bucky did not mince words. The #1 strategy for the planet was to tap the abundant renewable energy resources everywhere: wind, solar, geothermal, hydro, and link it up via high voltage tension transmission lines. We'll see this. This is a project that is in process. We've been working on it in terms of advocating it and promoting it, doing research around the world for 30 years. It has clearly taken hold, but not fast enough. So let's take a view that what all of us are now familiar with, the Earth at space. And it's obviously a gorgeous mosaic of the Earth at night from around the world. So the question is, what do you see and what do you not see? You clearly don't see borders from this particular picture, and you see lots of what I'm going to say wealth. Those that have lights have wealth. They have an infrastructure that allows them to have a refrigerator, lighting at night to extend the day, to learn for children. So there's a lot of things in this map that we sort of just don't look at. We just say that's a pretty picture of the Earth at night. Notice that there's 1 billion people that live in all of Africa, hardly lit at all. There's still 1 billion people, most of those in the African subcontinent, also in Latin America and in India, even though it looks well lit. And then not all lights are equal. 70%, 75% of these lights are still powered by fossil fuel, nuclear, and creating some form of long-term atmospheric or toxic pollution. So that's the challenge. We have created great wealth in the world for you and me, for most of us here on this call. But at the same time, we're creating an enormous amount of toxicity in the atmosphere and in some of the parts of the land that will persist and are persisting. So we do have some examples, and this is an important reality, that not everybody is polluting when they keep their lights on. Iceland is 100% renewable as it's in terms of its electricity sector. It's 80% hydro, 20% geothermal. Norway is 99%. Well, you can see the figures here. The point is that you can keep the lights on using just renewable energy. You will hear many falsehoods stated by people within the power sector, but there is plenty of land. There's plenty of renewable potential on the planet. And these 6-7 nations are almost 100% renewable today. So if they can do it, then it's doable elsewhere. That's the point. So let's go to the United States, a little bit smaller focus. There are 3 major transmission grids. So I'm talking about high voltage electric lines. We've all seen them. They are essentially the freeway for electricity. There's a Western grid in the US, an Eastern grid, and a Texas grid. If we go back to that cold snap that we had a couple of years ago, or the frost in Texas, the reason that they had issues and could not keep the lights on was because they kind of act as an island in Texas, and they're not connected to the rest of the US grid. Partially because they didn't want to listen to Washington and the FERC. So the more connected we are, the more we can take advantage of power being generated somewhere else, especially when there's an emergency in the network somewhere. So interconnections allow us to tap renewables far away and deliver them to where you and I work and live. I live in San Diego. I happen to have solar on my rooftop, but before I had those, some of my best renewable energy came from Washington State, the hydropower coming from the Bonneville Power Administration all the way down the Pacific Intertie. But
it is awesome to see that we're developing many of these alternatives. But as you said, it's great to see how we could speed those up.
Yeah, so the question is 100% renewable, is there enough? And so there's a great development, or a graphic developed by Desert Tech, which is an organization that wants to develop the enormous wind and solar potential of Northern Africa along the coast, and obviously the solar potential, and extend those transmission systems into Europe. And so you can see that planned design there, and some icons for the wind power along the coasts, solar power all along Northern Africa. But I want to focus you on these red boxes down here so that you realize that there is no lack, and especially this red box right here. There's enough solar energy hitting that box. That's a square that goes from me to Santa Barbara, turn right, go the same 400 miles, turn right. It's not even 400 miles, turn right. This is for Barbara. There's enough solar energy hitting that box to power the world today. So there's no lack of solar potential on the planet. If anybody ever tells you there's not enough land, there's not enough solar potential, just go back to this slide. You can tell them Peter Meisen said, and this is fully researched, there is no lack of solar potential on the planet today. We have thousands of times more than we could ever use or need. And here's the sort of the comparison for that. What we use back in 2009, this is the most current slide I can find with this graphic. We used 16 terawatt hours per year. Now we're up to about a little over 20 terawatt hours per year on the planet, moving up to approximately 28 terawatt hours per year by 2050. So there's the usage of the world. The solar potential of the planet is this, in terms of just the solar, is that yellow sphere that you see right there. And the other renewables are all listed here. So there is no lack of renewable potential. So if we wanted to make that option, we could move to that quickly. We are moving to that quickly now. It's just truly not fast enough. So there is no lack. What we've done with GENI as an organization, I would focus as an engineer on the electricity industry. We had covers of the industry magazine. I would go to the World Energy Congress and speak to delegates there. Had the cover of the New Scientist, which is comparable to our Scientific American, and a panel that we hosted in Winnipeg years and years ago. So our focus was to create engineering validity, that this was doable, this made economic sense, because if it wasn't, if you couldn't prove that it was safe and economically effective, it could never get built. So that was the point that I wanted to work on for the first 10 years. Clearly now you'll see a shift, because renewables are now capturing the lion's share of new energy generation on the planet. There was a shift just a few years ago where renewables are now over in the 60% category. And actually in this last year, if you get 2020, new renewables on the world captured 80% of the generation. So only reason that happens is because either people are saying, I don't want coal-fired generation anymore, or it's not economic. And the answer is on that is both. It's not as economic to build large fossil fuel generation plants as it is to build new wind and solar and geothermal. So they are winning economically, and they clearly are having headwinds with people in the environmental sector. So that's the good news, is that you can see in the EU, the United States, and China, we are only really building renewables, but we're starting from a very small base. And so that's the challenge. And so here's the problem. And you've seen this on the cover of the the front page of the New York Times when they're talking about COP26 right now. This is essentially the projection of CO2 emissions in the world. Goes back to 2015, not very far back, comes to 2020, and here we are just projected to 2030, which was where the Paris Agreement was actually targeted for. So we just go back 6 years ago, and it said, boy, we're going to try to actually limit our CO2 emissions and turn the corner. And that was the agreement that we made in Paris. It just was not up to the task, and it was all voluntary. And even now today, you see that to turn the corner on CO2 emissions in the world means we literally have to do a radical shift in how we generate power and in transport to get down to the 2 degrees C increase. And if we want to get to 1 degree C, down to where IPC says, down to this level, it's just a radical shift from what we're doing today. And here's the challenge on the right-hand side. In 1992, primary energy is all forms of energy, transportation, power, heating. 87% came from fossil fuels. 4 years ago, it was still 85%. So after 30 years of doing this work, after all of these conferences, these COP26 of the 26th meeting of the parties that started back in 1995, after all of the agendas of Rio 1992 that we went to, Arthur, we've only moved the needle 2 percentage points in 25 years. So it's just way too damn slow and not broad or deep enough. So that's the challenge. Everybody's aware. I'm a little bit with Greta Thunberg. When we say net zero, when we say increased renewables, it sounds a little bit like blah, blah, blah to me at some of these meetings, because I know they don't have teeth and it does not move the commercial sector. So what are the consequences now? We've all seen it, the fires that are just enormous, the droughts that are with us again in California that we talked before. This latest rainstorm did not fill the reservoirs. And if you have fires and floods right afterwards, it looks like Montecito right there where Barbara lives in Santa Barbara. So what are engineers doing? I'm an engineer by training, and I ask the question, what really matters in the world? Here's the challenge that we face. So here's the reality that I try not to talk with young kids about, because it's they didn't cause this. Most of us have got some gray hair. I don't know about all of us. I can't see your pictures, but this is a real picture of what we are causing from our high quality of life. 25 years ago, the world scientists, 2,000 of them got together and issued the first global warming to humanity. That's the light gray portion of these graphs, the light gray, you see that? So that was the 25 years ago. They said back here, we need to be doing something on these 9 issues. Now they've issued the second warning to humanity. So you think we would pay attention to this. It got a little bit of press in the New York Times. The scientists led by a man named William Ripple up in Oregon. So I want to dig deeper into each one of these quickly, not in a deep way because we don't have enough time. The only thing of these 9 charts that has gotten better, by the way, has been ozone from the Montreal Protocol of years ago. So quickly, here's the challenges that we are now facing and we must deal with, and we need to deal with them all at the same time. They're all interconnected, and why I suggest we need a place to come together and do this work in a collaborative, accelerated way. Aquifer depletion. So we are sucking the water out of the underwater aquifers. The example of the Aral Sea is the seas are drying up because we're using too much of that water for irrigation. It is a challenge when the aquifer is dry. You don't pump any more water again. So a challenge for many areas of the world, clearly Africa being one of the most challenged. Fishery depletion, we've gotten very good at ocean farming and not farming, excuse me, ocean trawling. And so many of the big fish have been depleted for the oceans, and I think we're aware of that and why we've gotten into ocean farming. 85% of our oceans are at their limits. That's a scary concept. Dead zones around the world because of our great agricultural ability, all of the fertilizers and phosphates that go into growing our crops faster, ultimately get into the river systems and end up in the coastlines. You can see all around the world dead zones and zones of concern, basically because of our fertilizer and our farming. Deforestation, one of the issues that was just on the agenda yesterday and made a huge commitment by the leaders at the COP26 was to reduce deforestation. I want to say they wanted to stop deforestation in the next 10 years. I think that's what I read. But here was the study from NASA, because they've got real good satellites that can see what's happening, that at the current rate of deforestation, and some countries, they just seem not to care, that we will lose all rainforest in 100 years if we don't stop. And part of the real challenge is, if you see the bottom right picture there, some people in many places of the world, if they have no other energy, their only source of fuel is firewood. So the average woman in some places in Africa walks 5 miles every day for water and wood, just so that they can cook food for their family and boil water. So pretty hard to stop deforestation unless you have another energy option in those places. Species extinction is now in its sixth major loss around the world, caused by us. Previous extinctions were caused by meteors hitting the planet, massive die-offs of microorganisms in previous times. This is millions of years ago. And right now, we are the ones that are causing the species extinction because of our land use patterns and fossil fuel use. So another critical thing, and when you lose a critical species in the food chain, what happens? We'll find out. CO2 emissions is clearly what they're talking about a lot at COP26. This is an important scientific understanding for anybody that has any questions about this. We have done ice core data that looks at bubbles of air that are trapped in ice hundreds of thousands of years ago, in this particular case, back 800,000 years. So they can actually look at concentrations of the atmosphere that is in those air bubbles as they go deeper down in the ice core data. And so at the same time, they can look at those temperatures that correlate with that ice core data. And so it's clear that they correlate. If you look at these two graphs, there is a correlation causation between the two, that when the concentration of CO2 goes up, the temperature goes up. When the concentration of CO2 goes down in parts per million, temperature goes down. So here's where we are today. We were never above 300 parts per million prior to the Industrial Revolution, and since the Industrial Revolution, we are now up at 417 parts per million as of this year. It's gone vertical. It's 30% higher than it's ever been in the last 800,000 years. So if CO2 goes up vertical, what do you think that curve will do? And we have seen the heat waves and the fires and the consequence of that. So this has been brought on by ourselves, and the only way to turn the curve is to reduce that CO2 concentration number along with methane. So the temperatures are increasing. This has been in the last 10 years, we've had the hottest years in the last decade on record. Dying crops, floods, nothing that you haven't seen already in the front pages. Population growth is also going to be a driver on this one. Back when I was born, you and I, Arthur, there were half as many people in the world as there are today. So clearly less than half the economy. There's projected to be 9 or 10 billion by 2050, most of them moving to urban areas that are already stressed in their needs for water, sanitation, and food. So you can't just build new structures and systems for today's situation. You have to plan for the growth in the future. What Bucky called comprehensive anticipatory design science. You have to look comprehensively at all of these issues. You have to anticipate the trends that are coming, and then use good design science in your planning going forward. So I guess the summary statement there, the problems are growing faster than our collective ability to solve them. They just are. It's impossible for any segment, any portion of our society to solve something by itself because it's interconnected to everything else. So what I say we're missing is speed, scale, optimal design across all nations, and we have to work together. You can't solve CO2 unless the United States and China do it together. And they're not at COP26 really this time, because the United States has been the biggest emitter of CO2 on the planet collectively, and now China is emitting more than anybody else because of their demand for their economy to grow, get out of poverty, and for us to buy the stuff that's now in their ports to ship to us. So if we're going to solve this, it's one of those issues you can't do alone. You have to do it in concert with the rest of the world. So where do we go? Where do we go to grapple with the most challenging issues of our time? Is it a university? Is it the United Nations? Where do we go to solve these things? I've been to global meetings like COP26 for years. I've been going to these, and it doesn't seem like conferences are enough. It doesn't seem like writing more papers and books is enough. So that's my question. What do we do? And I suggest we need an accelerator. Bucky said we did need something that would accelerate our ability to understand these issues, to visualize, and to actually work on them quicker. So we need to be able to visualize past trends and future projections. We need to provide an experience that's immersive, that we can surround ourselves in these issues, partially to what I say scare us to death. We need to wake up. And if we don't wake up and move quicker, we will just drift into these challenges even a faster pace. They have to be collaborative. We need to learn faster together. And it's really meant to be a place for, I'll call it the global community of researchers, engineers, smart people to design, fund, and build solutions quicker. So what we have today, we have control rooms for space. Arthur, you mentioned it at Mission Control. This exists in Houston. You can go visit it. You've seen them on TVs. It's where we actually, in a real-time way, look at all of the space systems of the International Space Station to make sure it's safe, that the astronauts are safe, they're able to do their experiments. It's a 24/7 environment for this particular function. We have control rooms for war. Here's the Moscow War Room. Looks a lot the same. It has large screens. It has people sitting around computers. Obviously a much different function than Mission Control, but it's meant to be a surround immersive environment so that you can understand what's going on and make smarter decisions quicker. In this case, it was for war, but let's look at what Procter Gamble does. They have the same kind of mission control room to be able to sell more soap. So a surround immersive environment so that they can connect with their supply chain around the world to move toothpaste and shampoo onto our shelves quicker. So if it's good enough for space, if it's good enough for war, if it's good enough for major corporations, why not for peace and sustainable development? Why not control rooms for global and local sustainability? So this doesn't exist yet. This is a great visualization that we had done. So it's meant to be a digital floor, a surround environment so that we can get together and work on these issues in an integrated fashion. Where we can visualize solutions, share strategies, measure results. Arthur, you had, of the people on the call, I think you and Melanie are the people that have visited the Sim Center that we had downtown. This is a picture of that. It was a converted bank. So it had 12 large screens all the way around the room with a middle projection screen. What was unique about this that we believe is that on each one of these tables were 2 computers, each connected to one of those screens, so that after a presentation, if you had something to add, if you had another opposing point of view, you couldn't just give me your opinion. You had to show us in a way from a reputable source that validated what you were saying. So we wanted to get the BS out of the room real quick. If you want to solve problems, you don't need an outlier that's just spouting nonsensical stuff. If you wanted to add value, then add real value. Show your visual, show your graph, your chart, your GIS map as a part of the solution so it can be integrated. And that was our facility. It was we couldn't maintain it certainly because of COVID. We couldn't have people gather. It wasn't a good viable business option, but it was the best visualization space in Southern California for 6 years. What we'd like it to look like is the one on the right. This is what's needed. And Bucky's vision in 1969 looked like this. He wanted to put it in the Montreal Dome as the U.S. exhibit at the International Trade Fair in the 60s. It didn't happen, but that's where he wanted. That was the dome still that exists there today. I always like Bucky's statement here. We try to go back and do the same thing and solve the same thing the way we've done it before, but it's kind of like you can't. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. If you want to transform the transportation sector, you can't go up against the oil industry or the coal industry. They're just too powerful and too much money. You've got to build wind turbines and solar farms that beat them on the bottom line, that actually make their industry obsolete, which is why wind and solar are winning today. I'm not pitching Tesla, but he's built a better transportation option, and you can get a dozen different EV cars today that you never have to put in oil, gasoline in the car. And when you go and you get a service, the only thing they do on your service is they rotate your tires. And I speak from example there. I'm just stunned how cheap it is to actually run an electric car. When you finally get one, everybody should go test them out. So that's what we have to do. We have to build a new model that makes the old way that we did it obsolete. So the Sim Center, it's about visualizing sustainable solutions to global and local problems, so we make informed choices quicker. And then my wife always adds, because we're running out of time. And she's right. Some of these issues, you saw the trends there from the world scientists. We are running out of time on our fisheries. We are running out of time on CO2 emissions. We are running out of time on deforestation. We cannot keep our heads in the sand any longer. We assert that we need a place that you can visualize these things, not for space or war or business, but for global and local sustainability. So what do we need? It needs a space, it needs technology. The technology is really off-the-shelf technology today. It doesn't cost that much to set these up. And then institutional partners, we're wanting to work with some people in Rotary to move toward a space potentially at the headquarters. I've even talked with some people in Southern California here in Baja about a great potential place at the COLEF, the Colegio del Frontera Norte in northern Baja California. So why are we here? That's the question I sort of ask all of us. Why are we here on Earth? Why are we here as humans? In the IEEE sense, we're here to benefit humanity, to improve global conditions, to solve problems. Most of us are pretty privileged. We have a roof over our heads, we have running water, we have a toilet. If you have any of those in the world today, you are a privileged citizen, because 60% of the world don't have that. So I think we're here to make the world a better place. And in Rotary, they've taken on these 7 areas of focus. With that kind of horsepower, and I think in the right venue, a lot of these things can be accelerated. And so I liked a gentleman that I met years ago. He's passed away now, Walter Hickel. He was a Secretary of the Interior under Reagan, a governor of Alaska. He was also the chair of a Northern Forum. I didn't always agree with all the politics that he had, but he came to our Bucky Centennial because he had hosted Bucky in Alaska once and made a pretty profound, I think, a statement. And we all kind of know it now. It's pretty hard to have peace if you're hungry. It's hard to have peace if there's social injustice. And he said war really was just a big project. We spent an enormous amount of money on war and preparing for war. And he called it, well, that's a big project. Why don't we have big projects to solve the global issues, like a energy grid that taps renewables and a sim center? So again, I say this is the kind of thing that we need to do to really to accelerate some of these problems that we are facing in the world and solve them quicker.
Well, what a awesome presentation, both in terms of just, I felt my heart just sinking in pain when I see that we haven't moved the degree the thing more than 2 degrees, and that we're still plunging towards extinction, and that huge jump in the CO2 emissions, unprecedented in the history of the planet, and we don't even know what the consequences of that are. So it's scary, and yet at the same time very empowering to think about some of these solutions that are so much at hand. So you mentioned where can we take this? We can take it to conferences, but it seems like we're falling on deaf ears and so on. And I wonder if we could comment a little bit about what Garry's idea was. It mentions to build a new world, we must build it. Well, he had this audacious idea that if the Declaration of Independence says that it is the right of the people to institute new government, if almost every constitution reflects that, maybe one of the key things we have to do as part of the building the new model is both this energy system, but also a new kind of political system in the world where it's people power from the bottom up, and it needs to build right into the architecture. Something that you mentioned, it can't just people spouting nonsensical nonsense. It has to be sharing workable solutions, build right into the architecture, a way we interactively, what Garry said, bring to the top the highest and best wisdom of each person and amalgamate that into creating solutions for our world. So he called it integrity. He called it having these Bucky Fuller dome type models, a geodesic sphere of our all interacting in terms of the hubs of the sphere into a synergistic way of doing things. So like these Zoom meetings all over could have a protocol that brings us together across the political boundaries that divide us, whether Arab, Jew, or any disputes and anything, and brings us together to not spout nonsensical things or not to blame and yell at each other, but come up with the best solutions. How do you see Bucky Fuller's ideas of the geodesic sphere and Garry's ideas about syntegration? Were you familiar with his ideas about his integrity system of evolving a new way that we just go out and do it and build a new political system, a new place to take this issue, the people of the world?
Only in a minor way. I did not study deeply the things that Garry was developing. I signed up for the global citizen passport, and I don't use it. I still use an American passport. That seems to work better when I go in and out. I don't think we're going to get rid of political boundaries anytime soon. That does not seem to be a realpolitik in our global condition. But we do have technologies that clearly that just leap over political boundaries. Zoom and our teleconnectivity is one of those. So we have people from all over the world on many Zoom calls now, so they ignore political boundaries. What's great about transmission lines is we have one between ourselves in Southern California and Baja California, where you and I live, Arthur. So there's a couple of them go right across the border. They're irrespective of that three tall fences that are there that deliver power back and forth between Baja and San Diego, depending on the need and the production at the time. The most integrated border in the world is US and Canada. There are 100 electrical interconnections between US and Canada because Canada is blessed with renewable potential and the United States wants to buy that, and it's a good win-win relationship. So same thing in any transmission line. It's always a win-win deal, otherwise it wouldn't get built. So that's the unique nature. If you go back to that Earth at Night map of the world, all of those lights on the planet today have an electrical infrastructure underneath that crosses local, national boundaries because it makes economic sense to trade in that real-time commodity. Electricity is a real-time thing. We don't store very much of it. You can store little bits, but it's essentially we generate it and use it at the same instant. And so the more you're interconnected, the more you're able to buy and sell from distant neighbors. You're able to have more stability within that system. So it's one of those technologies that actually helps break down, if you will, political boundaries, because it enables us to mutually have a mutually beneficial relationship in our most fundamental requirement, which is electrical energy.
I want to ask one more question and then throw it open to general questions from everyone. But I think that's so crucial what you said about, and Garry, of course, agreed. He never said we should get rid of nations, just as in Europe, when the borders came down between the nations, they didn't get rid of the nations. They still had all their national identities and their pride, but they just didn't have to go, paying for border guards and shooting each other for moving around and all that. And but in any case, I think the idea of technology rising above the borders that divide us and being a connecting agent, if it's done in the right direction. I mean, technology can be what destroys us, but it can be what saves us. When I looked at that map you showed of how Northern Africa could be an incredible solar farm for Europe, and yet saw how dark Africa is with lacking energy, so often all the cell phones, all the wonderful things we have are because we've had a colonial system that's extracted, that's repressed and forced into power, really repressive governments and so on in Africa, where they haven't been able to get it together as a result of colonialism. Will this big solar farms be another example of something that powers Europe and not Africa?
Well, I went to Morocco, and I tell you, the largest solar installation that I've seen on the planet, and I think it is one of those, is in it's called Noor, N-O-O-R, which means light in the language. And they had all three massive solar technologies in Morocco. It's providing a third of their own energy for their own country, and they want to sell it. There are underwater HVDC cables to Europe. They're already selling. Sometimes there is excess from what they're generating themselves. So it has parabolic trough, it has photovoltaic, and it has the solar tower, which gets really hot. And what's nice about that particular solar technology, we have them in the desert in Southern California. You can see them when you drive over to Las Vegas. Those circular panels focus on a tower. It's molten salt, so that salt, it creates molten salt. So that salt then goes through a heat transfer, boils water, and creates electricity in the turbine. But salt can stay hot into the evening, so you can actually have solar energy producing power at 10, 11, and 12 o'clock at night, because it's this solar battery essentially that stayed hot because of the medium of the salt. So that's the new technologies that are enabling us to expand that solar potential in many different deserts around the world. You wouldn't just Northern Africa, you can do it any place you have good sunshine, which is all around the equatorial region.
Well, it's exciting to think about salt as a battery, because that could help solve our desalination problem if all that salt could be turned into energy power. But also, it seems to me that one of the big things Garry pushed for was world law, and there ought to be a law. And in Africa, what's happened so often is there's an energy resource that gets exploited. Somebody locally gets paid, but it's the local dictator or local group that's oppressing the people rather than going to all the people. We kind of need to build in a thing where for every kilowatt that Europe, build a massive system that can capture this energy, but says for every kilowatt that goes to Europe, every person in Africa gets a share of that. They're the ones who own these resources. They get it directly. And when all the people in Africa have the buying power that they've gotten their token, their whether it's a cryptocurrency or whatever else, that they've gotten some currency for the power that they've sold, because it's theirs, it's the people, it's not the government. Each person gets it. If they all have that buying power, they would quickly find a way to get themselves educated, their families brought together, to bring their communities together, to not have to burn firewood, to buy solar alternatives. I guess, well, I want to open it to questions for everybody, but a quick comment about that, on there ought to be a law, and then let's sort of open to other questions.
Well, I don't know if there ought to be a law, but here's what I learned when I was in South Africa for the UN conference on sustainable development. This was in Johannesburg, and I did some touring around the country. And Eskom is their main utility. They have one utility in South Africa. and it is a pretty well developed utility, especially for its mining sector, because they are well known for extraction. There's other problems, obviously, with that, but I saw tremendous power lines that were leading to those mines, because those mines operate 24/7, or they don't run. And I saw those same lines going over townships that had no electricity at all. So that's where the people that worked in the mines, but that's where the power did not reach, because the transmission line was going to to support the industry. And so I asked the guy from ESCOM, well, why don't you drop a line there? And he says, well, they can't afford it yet. And once those people get to have enough income from working in the mine to be able to support the transmission line that then drops and creates the mini grid within that village, there wasn't the economic driver to actually build it there. So it's sometimes that chicken and egg problem.
Yeah, but see, the chicken is the one that's calling all the shots here. And, they're stealing this resource that belongs to all the people.
If you're gonna build something, and I hate to say this, the people that are gonna build it first are those that have money.
Right. But if built right into
I could not have afforded.
You get the money, but 20% of it has to go to the local people. If you had a law like that has to go directly to the people, then the people in the township could afford to buy it. Then they could all afford it. I mean, those resources started with them. It started with their land, and that's what the indigenous movement we were talking about and everything's all about. But let's move on to other people's questions. It's a big discussion, but somehow built into this whole idea of building sustainable energy, we also have to build a sustainable world for the people who are actually providing the energy. Here they are, the miners creating all this, they're getting paid a pittance, and of course they can't afford it because we're getting rich off their backs. So anyway, we got to move on to questions, but what other comments and questions do we have? Because there's only a little more time.
Oh my goodness, we have questions. And Peter, this has been marvelous. And what a discussion. Woo! Okay, so quickly, let's go to the questions. And the first person to ask a question is Richard. Richard, go right ahead.
Thank you very much, Melanie. And thank you very much, Peter, for this excellent presentation. I think actually I've heard, this is the second time I've heard you. I would just take an issue, though. When we look at Africa and we look at third world nations that haven't had our colonial history, you can look at telephone lines, and the third world now has jumped to cell phones and doesn't need telephone lines in that infrastructure. And I'm wondering if the same applies to your large grids, if local solar, local wind is the way to go, as opposed to putting in these large grids.
Absolutely. So I'll just jump right in small villages today, what we are building are small solar systems that can provide enough electricity for the refrigerator to keep the medicines cold, to pump water out of the ground and have it filtered. That's exactly what's needed today, and what many Rotarian clubs are doing around the world are those small village energy development systems, and that's exactly what we need to be doing everywhere that has no electricity at all. As that village develops, just like us in the United States, as we developed, we wanted more. Okay, we needed more power to do the things that we did. And it just turns out that sometimes your neighbor's electricity production is cheaper than your own as you got more developed. And we started connecting those grids because it made good economic sense and good emergency backup sense. So that will happen just naturally in the course of development. But what they need today are small wind, small solar farms, small mini grids in those developing areas, not big transmission lines at this point.
My second point is, I was talking with a Rotarian friend through the amazing Zoom now that we're all on, and he was pointing out that they have developed a patented system to use sand as a battery. So you heat up the sand with electricity, and then when you need the electricity off the solar hours, you convert it back into electricity through a geothermal mechanism.
It sounds similar to the salt
Yeah,
thermal,
same idea, but with the sand, it's
but
much
using it as
bigger, and so therefore, and still much cheaper.
Yep, yep. Notice the difference between when you have if you have a pool and you keep your pool at a temperature, let's say at 76 degrees, it doesn't change much over the night. Water doesn't have a huge thermal gradient when the sun goes down and the sun comes back up, but land, the concrete does around your pool, the land does. So there's a big change in temperature for solid masses at that gradient as opposed to liquid. And so that's what you're talking about there in using sand as a thermal heat source.
Great. Okay, well, let's go to Michael. Michael, if you'd like to unmute, please.
Peter, wonderful talk. Thank you so much. I've always been interested in energy and was in Austin, Texas for a long time. Went to all the Solar Austin and all the energy meetups at UT. So speaking specifically about Austin, where I used to live, where I fortunately wasn't there during the ice bomb last year when they had such a grid failure. And I was wondering if you were involved at all in like figuring out, because I went to the ERCOT, visited the ERCOT headquarters and the control room and everything where they control the entire grid, and it's fascinating to see that. But what I understand is the Texas grid is really quite isolated, and there's not much interconnectivity between other states at all, which was contributed to the near complete failure of the entire Texas grid. I think they came within 4 minutes of just losing everything. So that's a big story for you and your expertise. What do you are you involved with what might be a solution for the future for our grid just in the United States?
You sort of answered your own question there, Michael. The challenge of Texas is that they have a notion of themselves as their own country in this particular aspect. That's the ERCOT grid. It is not interconnected much with the rest of the Western grid or the Eastern grid. They wanted to not have to listen to Washington, so they isolated themselves. And when they had this emergency, there was no ability to transmit power from any of their neighbors because the lines weren't there to deliver that power. They tried to blame it on the wind farms. That was a scapegoat. That was not the wind turbines that had the problem. Some of their gas lines did fail. So there was just sort of, I'll call it not enough long-term strategic planning to do what-if scenarios. And clearly, Texas is in a path for storms, for hurricanes, for flooding. We've seen all of that in this last decade. So if you're an energy system planner, you have to run all of those scenarios in your planning and go, you run those what if scenarios and say, what if we lose this? What if we lose this particular power plant? What if this particular transmission line goes down? You're always planning for an N-1, G-1 planning, which means you lose a generator, you lose a main transmission line. You always have that in your planning, but they didn't go far enough. They didn't invest for a long-term system, which in a smart economy would connect with the rest of the country. Maybe they'll evolve into that. I can't tell you. Texas is a unique state.
They definitely had a warning because a few years earlier there was when a lot of natural gas plants failed, and they're just not weatherizing them. They didn't invest the money after that lesson that they had, and then the big one came, and they still hadn't weatherized it. And what I understand, the natural gas plants failed. But anyways, I hope that perhaps David Gallup is on today, and along with David, which issues the World Citizen Passports, and Arthur, we're looking at creating a World Citizen Network for solutions and identity as well, identity for refugees around the world, people who have nothing in the form of any identification, so they could have a permanent identity online, so they could receive social services. So hopefully maybe we can get together on a separate Zoom when you have time, and we can dive deeper into that as far as being a solutionary network and an education network, because a lot of what you're talking about is educating people. honest solutions.
Education comes first. You have to show people, you have to give them hope, and you have to show them that it isn't just false hope, that there are solutions and best practices. So that's part of education. But I think also I think on some of these issues, you need to educate them to the point where you scare the crap out of them, that we cannot be complacent anymore on some of these issues. CO2 is really an existential development. We had a presentation from not Charles Keeling, Ralph Keeling, Charles's son, who followed the CO2 emissions from Mount Mauna Loa in Hawaii. And since 1950, it's gone up 3 parts per million every single year, no matter what. I didn't show the Keeling curve directly, but you can go on and find it out. It is an iconic graphic. And everything that we've done on the planet to turn the curve, to move to renewables, to reduce deforestation, has not changed that pattern one iota. It's 3 parts per million every single year. And so if you want to know how we're doing, that's one of the critical graphs that we have to follow. I can't remember his name, it'll come to me, not McKibben, not Bill McKibben, Dr. James Hansen worked with the group 350.org. And they said, we need to actually go back to 350 parts per million to have a stable environment like you and I grew up in. And right now it's at 417. Ralph Keeling, when he did his presentation at our Sim Center, said, if we don't do anything, we're going to be at 350 and 450 and 550 parts per million within our lifetimes. And my head just exploded, because the concept of what that would mean only multiplies what we're already seeing every day in the world in terms of disasters. So he kind of said it almost scientifically, but the consequence is just disastrous for anybody in the next few decades living on the planet. So this is one of those things we have to kind of, I like to, scare the crap out of people sometimes and say, you can't continue doing the same thing or you're going to get the same result. So that's part of education.
Exactly. Education and fear of what, we have to, it is a sense of urgency, and people need to know it, and we have to act on it. So that's, and we want to go to Joanne, for your question, go right ahead.
Yeah, fascinating presentation, but I want to bring it down to the what can I do level. I became familiar with 2 small operations that are promoting solar cookers. And so I was asking, how widespread an idea is that, especially in the more enlightened countries that, we're solar cooking in your own house, home, hut, whatever you have, is really feasible.
I hosted a gentleman who developed solar cookers, and it was an interesting afternoon. He was cooking chicken in our backyard in a solar cooker. I think it took about 4 hours given the time. So I don't think that that's ever going to be a viable solution in I'll call it the developed world, where we want more instant gratification in our meals. It is a great tool in developing world, because it uses the sun. The sun is free to all of us if we have the right device to harvest it. And it's just some mirrors focused on and aluminum foil focused on a black pot to cook something in using the sun. So it's a great solution, and one that I know Rotary promotes all around the world in the developing world. I don't think it's a viable option in the United States. If you want to know what you can do, here's what I want to, and people ask me, well, what can I do? The 2 biggest things that you do to produce CO2 as a human in our first world culture is in our transport and in the electricity you buy. It's 2/3 of the CO2 emissions for all of us. So if you want to make a difference personally or within your company, if you have a company to buy a fleet or run a business, transition your power to a renewable energy provider or put solar on your rooftop. So get off of fossil fuels when you pay for your electricity bill. And if you don't have the ability because you're an apartment or a condo and can't put solar on the roof, usually most utilities now, you can call them and say, do you have a 50 or 100% renewable option that you can purchase? They don't always promote it, but my utility has it. They don't promote it. So if you want to be a green customer through your utility, call them and say, I want to be one of those customers that buys 100% green energy. You'll usually pay a little bit more. I'm going to say you and I can afford it to pay a little bit more. And the more people that start purchasing power that way puts more economic pressure for them to buy more wind and solar into their grid system. The other thing you can do, I mentioned, is get off using a gas-powered car. Obviously, walk, ride your bike, use transit. If you're going to get a car, look at one of the EVs or one of the plug-in EVs. They just make sense.
Okay, David Gallup, president of the World Service Authority, would also like to show us something. David, go right ahead.
Peter, thank you for wonderful comments today that really share the importance of how we use energy. I actually do, if you want to see it, I actually have a chart that was inspired by the World Game Institute, which Peter, you've probably seen before, but maybe not in the way I've done it. It'll take maybe 1 to 2 minutes max. If you want me to share my screen, I can do that.
Sure.
Because it does relate to how we use energy. Are you seeing this picture of all these red squares?
Yes.
So this shows that the biggest user of energy, and Peter, you mentioned this earlier, is national militaries around the world. And this is something that David Swanson mentioned in the last podcast about the waste of energy and resources by militaries. And it's true that almost $2 trillion are used every year to prepare for and wage wars. So each of these squares, 2,000 squares, each is $1 billion, is all for war. But what if we just use even a quarter of those $2 trillion for peaceful means, as Buckminster Fuller said, for livingry instead of weaponry? And that would help us to actually start fulfilling the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, even right at the bottom of this chart, ending hunger, that's maybe only $400 billion to end hunger. Why aren't we ending hunger immediately today? We could if we stop wasting our resources and our energy on killing rather than living. But what I like to do, the last part of the chart, is what if we changed all of those squares to green squares, meaning that we don't fight with each other, we don't war with each other. Everything that we do, all of our sustainable use of resources and energy is for peaceful activities, like you said, Peter, the big project.
David, thank you. Go back to the previous one, because I'm very familiar with that. It's a slightly different version that they used in the World Game, but exactly the same thing. This is a powerful, powerful graphic, because it says, here's how much we spend at the whole square, spend in the world every year on military. It's just, the US is almost up to $1 trillion. The rest of the world does the balance. An extraordinary number, although we throw out $1 trillion right and left now in terms of what we've been spending on COVID recovery. But to take 1/4 of that every year, just 1/4 of that, and redirect that money into livingry, into sustainability on 17 of the most high priority goals of the UN, of ending hunger, of creating education globally, clean water for everybody. All of those things together is just 1/4 of that. And if we solve those, clearly there wouldn't be the need for as much military anyway, because now people don't fight when they're happy. People fight when they're unhappy and hungry. So it's kind of like what Walter Hickel said. So this is when people say, well, how are we going to afford this? When Musk says, what are you going to do with my $6 billion if I give it to you to end hunger? Well, we're going to do this. We're going to solve one of the major problems of the world, and you can be involved in that. What higher thing can you be involved in if you've got unlimited wealth? So here's a great graphic for Elon.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you for these tips, this information. This is amazing. We've gone over, so I'm going to give it back to Arthur. Arthur, back to you.
Thank you so much to Peter for an extraordinary, eye-opening, and crucial look at the world today and a key way that we can be involved in fixing it and creating a sustainable future. So thank you very much. I hope everyone will go to your website, GENI.org, and see the incredible work that you're doing. So join us next week for Renee Wadlow, who is the who knew Garry way back when he was part of the meeting with the guru in the machine shop in New Jersey, who helped inspire Garry on his journey to have the courage to actually declare a government of, by, and for the people of the world. It's going to be an incredible talk from one of the leaders in the world citizen movement. Here's Arthur Kanigis signing off for the People Powered Planet podcast.
World citizen, lift up your voices. Oh, you know we got something to say. All we need is the same directions, heading in one way.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video.